You know, the mother says, I am. But the illusion says, okay, we're a package. You know, we're crystal and meat. Okay. But, you know, we need a who. You know, you always need a who. You need a way in which to be able to identify and fix a subjective being. And the way in which you do this is not what, this is not when, this is not where, it's not how, it's who. And you know what that who brings you? It's so cute. Names. Names. It's all about names. You see, if you don't have a name, you don't exist. I mean, you just don't. You don't exist. I mean, not in the context of the Maya. I mean, we know that there's people's, you know, there are odd occasions and things. But you see, it begins with the naming. And this is all personal. It's all about being. It's all about what we call anthropomorphization. In other words, that who, we extend that who into things that are far greater than the person across the room from you. Who are they? You know, what was their name? You know, I mean, this is one of the basic things of communication, is that somebody has to have a way of calling you. I mean, you can't have a whole planet that's called Hey You. It would be very confusing. See, we have to have names. I don't know if you can really grasp how significant that is, because that's the whole joke of the Maya. The moment you give it a name, it exists. You know, it's this guy here in the States that sent out requests for credit cards from his dog. And the dog got approval. You know, I mean, give them a name, you know, and suddenly they're in the Maya and they get treated like everybody else in the Maya. Isn't that a delight? It's an incredible joke. You know. And I mean, masters know. So many of them have played naming games. Change people by changing their names. I mean, you know, Osho, that was a prime part of his package. And you really change somebody when you change their name. I know what happened to me when my name changed. You know, you're getting called by a different service. You know, and you respond. I mean, think about what a name does for you, you know? You know, you're in a restaurant and somebody shouts to somebody else and they're calling out what happens to be your name. Boy, everything inside of you jumps. They're calling me. You know? I'm up in the movie. It's magic. I learned that a long time ago. You see, I give names to everything. I give names to my cars and my toys and guitars, machines, and they all have nicknames. See, you give a name to something and it fits into the Maya right away. I mean, after all, what is the nature of advertising but coming up with a brand name? Boy, if you can come up with a brand name, you're a success. You have managed to find the right way to get into the Maya and take advantage of it. And it's all in the names. You know, there are people running around now paying fortunes for .com names that a few wiseacres were able to, you know, yeah, let's take a couple of these just in case. I mean, names are everything. You know, after all, one of the things that is most disturbing to young children is name calling. All that stuff. And you see, it all starts here. And it has to do with the nature of our language, what we call something, and how we see something. That it's out of that arises so much conflict in our lives. And you see, the moment that you can understand who you are in the Maya, and when you can understand who somebody else is in the Maya, then you can live with them. You just can't. It's an astonishing thing. Because you see, you can give a name to what you like, and you can give a name to what you don't like, and it makes it all acceptable. Because you know they can't do anything about it anyway. But you have to be able to give a name to it. I always felt that funny thing with this person. Aha, now I know why. And it's okay, I understand how that works. Now I know why. I know who they are. I know who I'm dealing with. See, I love my work. In the nature of my work, I deal with many people, and I deal with many people professionally. I know who they are. At least I know who they are in terms of their design. So I know what is, for me, okay, what isn't, what works, what doesn't work. And you see it right from the beginning. And so what? The moment that you see all that, you can let go. You can let go of interfering in all of that. You can let go in, trying to correct somebody. And this who business is very, very important to us. We need to know who we are. If we don't know who we are insecure. And of course, that's why the Maya is so uncomfortable, because everybody is running around in the Maya not knowing who they are, living out the not self, being deeply conditioned and in desperate search of, hopefully trying to find out who they are. What a different movie that is. When we get to a point in which the fifth base as it operates is operating through people who are honoring their type, we don't have that same dilemma at work. And you see, everything about all of these bases ultimately, with the potential exception of the first base, is all about finding some way to cooperate. Whether that's sexual cooperation or, whatever the thing is, at least finding some kind of way in which we can work and operate together. Whether it's about manipulating others to get them involved with you or all of these various aspects. And so it's very important to see that that's one of the major themes inherent in the whole structure. That mechanically, despite all of the setup that we have of our assumed separateness, the illusion of our difference, all of this stuff, we're constantly being forced to come to grips with each other, to find ways in which we can cooperate with each other. That real cooperation begins with knowing who somebody is. And you can see already how that works. I mean, in the formal environment of meeting somebody, you're told, this is Mr. Smith, whatever. If you get to know Mr. Smith, it may be Mr. John Smith, it may be eventually John. If you know them really well, it may be Johnny. In other words, that whole naming business carries all kinds of different import, and it allows you a deeper access to that person. Much deeper. I mean, my mother calls me Bobby. That's a name. It rings its bell. That's a Maya I remember, and I remember Bobby in the Maya. All those names are so important. What we call things. This is where the problem of morality and language is so devastating. The conversations I've had with you about things like the 58-2. We got a word like perversion, or 54, you got a word like corruption. All of the moralistic garbage that goes with, interpreting what that actually means. And it's one of the things for us to see is that until you get to a point where you know who you're dealing with, you're ruled by your moralities. I mean, you just are. You do not and cannot truly accept the other without knowing who you are and knowing who they are. And then it's possible. Then it's possible. That's real progress for us in terms of our humanity. But it means that we have to come to that point from a subjective perspective. We have to come to that point through thinking. We have to come to that point through communicating. So I must communicate with you the premises in order to start your thinking process, in order ultimately that we can have a mutation. It's the way in which it works. The sense is hearing. And this is truly the illusion of God itself. I mean, after all, I heard the voice. These are all illusions. But you see, given the limitation of what we are, We have to find ways to frame things. You know, the step-down energy of the forces that were communicating with me, I experienced that in the only way that I was capable of in that sense. But it was acoustic. That is, it was mostly acoustic. You know, in the beginning is the Word. You know, it's like the very first thing is God talking. Okay, let's create a universe. This hearing business, this is very special. You know, this is what changes us, ultimately. We have to hear it. You have to hear the Word. If you don't hear the Word, hard to get it. You have to hear it. And when you hear it, there's something else that's going on inside of you. Because what you're hearing is not necessarily the interpretation of the language that's being used and the word that's being spoken. But it's the frequency of its delivery. It's the frequency. You see, sound and the quality of sound and the frequency of sound operates in us at very, very profound levels, right down to the depth of our immune system, our lymphatic system, that we are deeply, deeply, deeply receptive to vibration. I've been in 3 or 4 earthquakes in my life, and one of the things that you get is that there is this vibration that you actually sense before you actually feel it. I mean, it's a vibration you sense, you know, because we're so attuned to frequency. And then one of the things about a human being, you know, this is where the dervish comes from, is that we are nothing but frequency. We are nothing but all of these particles, atoms, molecules vibrating, spinning, moving, us spinning and moving on the planet and all of this stuff. In other words, it's all frequency. It's all frequency. So hearing is a very special part of that frequency. Vision is another part of that frequency on that wavelength. And the acoustic for us is so important because if you cannot hear the word, you cannot be mutated. You know, it's actually a very simple thing. You know, if you don't know, you don't know. You know, if nobody tells you, you don't know. And this is all about the inherent business of the fifth base in telling. Let me tell you this illusion. Listen to my illusion. And that's what we do all the time. You know, this is what's really impacting on us. This is why we have this illusion that the mind is everything. Because mutation comes in through our head. You know? I mean, you got to have these holes for something. Eh? You know? That's how mutation enters us. It enters us as frequency. Now, by the way, as frequency, it doesn't necessarily have to use only the ears, but metaphorically, most of it is, and it's where it belongs, is the way we're speaking of it. You have to hear the word. That's why we have this in all of the religions, that they keep on repeating the word. They end up calling it mantras. You know, or whatever, litanies or liturgies or all of the different languages that are used to describe that process of simply repeating the word over and over and over again. And repeating the word over and over again, making that word mutative. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. That's what it's all about. You keep the word alive. You keep on putting the word into everybody. You keep on putting it in. You keep on putting it in. So it's something for us to recognize about the importance of the way in which communication works. Remember, I told you when it comes to memory that when something is of interest to you, to immediately communicate it. In other words, that the expansion of consciousness, the expansion of intelligence, the expansion of awareness is all about the communication of that, but it's not a one-way street. It's the communication and the interaction, the hearing and the speaking and the hearing. You know, this is an essential ingredient for us, and it's why we have classrooms. It's why we have all of these teaching venues that are available. It's why we have structures that permit us to be able to communicate our thoughts to each other so that we can hear it. Now, by the way, when you read something, you're also hearing it. I mean, there isn't anybody who reads that actually doesn't physically use muscles, okay, that in a sense create a frequency of which you can be tuned into. Mutation's magic, but it is the illusion. It's not one of the cornerstones of the dimensional mechanical realm. Mutation's an illusion because it's all subjective. Everything is always there, but you don't necessarily get it until it's time for you to get it. They can call AIDS a mutation, but it's always been there in the body. I mean, they'll find that the things that ultimately led to the possibility that that could be explosive, we'll see that it's very ancient. You know, we have all kinds of things inside of us that are simply on off switches. That's all. They can be turned on. So mutation is something that's waiting to happen. It's not like you got to pray for it. It's not like you got to hope for it, because it's going to happen anyway. And it's an illusion in the end. You know, by the time the mutation gets out, how quickly people forget that it was a mutation. It quickly becomes the norm. It quickly becomes the standard. I mean, if you go into a business community today and you watch people walking in and out of offices, it looks so different than 1950. You know? Aside from all the poor bastards that have to smoke outside. There's this mutation that's constantly taking place. It's always there, clicking in at different times. And it means that all of us are mutative. It means the illusion that the Maya is a mutative field. Thank God it's a mutative field, after all. Otherwise, you know, we would really be crystals in dead meat, which is not fun at all. Eh? Yeah, no, you got to bury them or burn them. What are you going to do with that? No, the mutation is there everywhere. But you see, we cannot enjoy the theater until we can suspend our disbelief. We cannot be in the movie until we are willingly extras in the film. And only then do we get the magic of all of this. You know, only then do you escape the pain of the Maya. I watched, I'm a news addict. And at the lunch break, I flip on CNN and there's a feature story on Ethiopia. And for, the second time in 16 years, they have massive famine that's taking place. And that there's this, it is so obvious to me how painful and how uncomfortable the world is for so many beings. And I never forget our privilege, my privilege in the lives that we have and the societies and cultures that support us. Yet at the same time, in looking at that, my understanding of all of that is that that's all just ignorance. It isn't anything else. And it isn't anybody's fault. And I'm not going to cry for those children. It's just what it is. But at some point when we can all embrace the Maya, that we can embrace the theater of life together, that there will be abundance for everyone. Because there already is. I mean, it's one of the things that drives humanitarians crazy on this planet, is that we destroy more food than we distribute to the poor. I mean, we destroy. It's there. It's not like it's not there. And the answer isn't some kind of draconian, humanitarian, fascist response, because none of that works. And it's not just about being generous, you can give $100 to some whatever it is, and that $50 is administrative and $10 is baksheesh, and and down the line until finally it gets to somebody down on the street. No, it's not about that. Again, it goes back to, what my concern is, that everybody who carries this knowledge impact as many people as possible with just the basics. Let them know what their type is. Set them on a track of changing resistance, and in the end, that changes everything. It isn't going to change in a hurry. None of us who are alive in this room, are going to experience this in our lifetime, other than in selective environments where we meet with people that are similar to us and have a similar kind of awareness and knowledge. The movement of any mutation in the Maya takes time. It doesn't matter that we're more speeded up. Oh yes, it's impressive. In other words, I didn't spend my whole life in obscurity as I would have done 1,000 years ago. And I certainly had a chance to be able to impact on far more people than would have been possible. Yet at the same time, real knowledge that impacts and changes the Maya takes hundreds of years in order to flower, because that's the way that it works. And so it starts with each and every one of you who carry that within you. If you carry the joy of the Maya within you, you change everybody in your life. You really do. And when I say the joy of the Maya, if you're an emotional person and you're down in your wave, enjoy the joy of that. Oh, I'm deadly serious when I say that. You see, wow, what a thing. I mean, what a mechanism. Yeah, I've lived with enough emotional people in my life. What a mechanism. Wow. I mean, that's real theater. That's drama, baby. And if you don't enjoy that drama that's coming through you, whether or not on the surface you feel lousy or not is not the point. The actor on stage isn't going to say, look, I don't want to feel lousy. You got to feel lousy. That's your job to feel lousy right now. The program wants you to feel terrible and be in it. And yet at the same time be a witness and a passenger of that experience. So that you see it for what it is, so it's not personal, so that you don't carry and hold inside of you all of that you process. Because you don't have to. You see, the Maya's gorgeous. I mean, there's certain times where if I've watched emotional people in full rage, and I have an inner laugh that's so loud, it's so hilarious, and they feel so bad the next day. I mean, that's a movie. It's part of the drama, but it's life. Hell, you're not going to go to the theater and see a movie that has no dramas flat. It'd drive you crazy. Where's the action? Where's the turmoil? Where's the heat? Where's the rage? Where's the this? That's life. And it's only terrible if you're taking it personal. It's only terrible if you really think that it's important. It isn't. It's just your role in the moment. It's what you're playing out. See, I used to detest that in emotional people. I don't anymore. I enjoy it. I mean, I don't have that kind of drama. And I like all that drama. I mean, after all, we're always attracted to what we're not, I like all that drama. I watch my boys, they're both emotional. Jeez, drama trip. And here I am, Mr. Cool, and there's this wild drama trip going on. Jiva the baby, when he's really upset, I call him a Muslim. He gets down on his hands and knees and cries into the floor. And it's like, woo, what a thing, eh? Imagine human beings got to live with that. You see, and it's a grace to see the humor in all of this. It's a grace to see that it's not personal, it's a mechanism. And that I will do everything in my power to educate my emotional sons to the joke. So they always know the joke. That they can be in full rage, that they can be in full drama, and still somewhere inside of them know that this is just the theater of their life. That's all. It's not whether it's good or it's bad or it's this or it's, Give up on all that. See, that's what mutation is all about. It's this magnificent mutation that's possible the moment you can accept what it is to be you, who you really are. Oh, I know who I am, And I tell you, I have the best laugh on me all the time. I know how funny it is to be me. It just is. You know, I don't take any of that personally, but I watch my movie. You know, I watch what goes on and all the things, but yeah, so what? I have no control over it. I can't dictate it. I can't do anything about it. I can't change it. I can't manipulate it. I can't do anything. I just ride inside the movie that's me. Good, bad, and indifferent. I'm a pure individual. I have the depths of melancholy that would turn some of you to stone. You know, and at the same time I'm going through that, I got to deal with the world, and I got to deal with the demands of my role and my personal life and blah, blah, blah. And I remember what that was like in the past. It's not that it's pleasant for me to go through that now. It isn't. It's human after all. It has its thing. But it doesn't bother me. It doesn't disturb me. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't keep me up at night. It doesn't do anything. It's just my life. It's just what happens. And you see, I know that's an illusion. That's the whole thing. It's my life. It just happens. That's my subjective illusion in this grand Maya. And it works. It works. That's the whole point. It works. You know, those of you that have had your moments with type, you know that. It works. It's what it's about. And then this whole Maya thing stops being such a heavy deal. The difficulty lies in the fact that we are not just nature, we are also nurture. That we are always conditioned by the forces around us and conditioned by the beings around us. There's enormous ignorance in the world, and everybody takes the world seriously. It's a very serious world. You know, they're going nuts in Miami, you know. It's a serious world, you know. Let's burn down some buildings. Let's make this really serious. You know, it's serious. It's the thing that I find most difficult in this life, for me, is how much seriousness I meet. I mean, reams of it. Reams of it. No, it's not. You got to get to the point that you see the joke. The joke's on us. We're the joke. And if we laugh at that and we enjoy that, we can enjoy this drama, we can enjoy this movie. That makes every difference. So this fifth base is very special. You know, what it does is it pulls together all of these mechanical corners and it says, okay, let's make up something that's useful, you know, so that we can all feel sort of at ease at being crystals and meat. You know, let's just relax and decide that, you know, we were created by God, you know, that, blah, 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 and on and on and on. Let's make up our world. And we've been making up our world every day ever since. So let's get the final draft, the final version. Let's get the Maya down tight now. See, that's the whole point. Eh? Let's get the Maya down tight. Let's not have little aspects of the Maya that we grasp. Let's get down to the point where we know the whole Maya structure and the way it works. And then all of us can, surrender to the illusion together, which would really be delightful. I want to close with a final illusion for you. And the final illusion that we're going to work with is that we're going to see how these different forces are going to interact with each other. In other words, the discussion I had in Neutrino Biverse about the relevance of the 5-element Chinese system, that this 5 is very important. And one of the things, if you're familiar with that and familiar with the 5 elements and the way in which it's applied there, you'll notice that there is there's always a graph that will show you, whether the rat and the pig get along or not. In other words, in terms of the elements, whether the fire and the wood, if you're fire and your partner is wood, it's not a good idea, So these elements have a natural relationship to them. So when we take that to the base level here, we're also going to see that there is a natural relationship that exists between certain bases. Okay? So if we begin with the yang, and if we begin with the whole business of movement, so if you look over here in the graph, and you look down to the lower right-hand corner, what you're looking at here is movement, and here you're looking at the first base. Now, look at its relationships in the graph. It has a relationship to being. That being is the yin-yin. This is pure matter. And it has a relationship to the design. And as we know, the design is the yin with the yang. In other words, it's the yin side. It's the eldest daughter. So one of the things to realize right away about how movement and evolution work, remember that movement at this end and evolution at this end, these are the two yang aspects. And if you go over here, you can see the two yin aspects. In other words, you can see the way in which each aspect, their connection is to the yang variations or the yin variations, depending on what they are, on either side. So, for example, if you're somebody that has the first base and you have the movement, it means that you have a natural relationship to the third and fourth bases. But you don't have a good relationship when you go across to the second base. Now think about how that works. What that means is that the father and the eldest son have trouble getting on, and so does the mother and the eldest daughter. Yeah, it's just the way that it works. In other words, you can see that the gap is always with your own kind. Always. So what we're going to see in the way in which relationships operate is that you're going to see that those connections from your base outward are going to be very important for you. And remember, it's not going to appear in the guise of gender related to whether this is yin or yang. In other words, you can be a first base and you have a connection to somebody. You have a connection to somebody who is a third base, who's the pure yin, and you have that connection, but that person could be male and so could you. I mean, don't confuse those issues. But please recognize that that is where you're going to have the most important connections. In other words, the most important connection for the one is going to be that connection that it can have with the 3 and with the 4. I mean, those are essential connections. They're outside of what creates the Maya, remember. They're on the border of the box in that sense. They're not the whole scene the moment you drop it in. In other words, you can look at them as if they were this diagram here at the top, okay, and just see that they're working at these angles. Now look, what that means is that if you go to the other side, if you go to the eldest son, if you go to evolution, if you go to the second base has the same affiliations. It also is going to connect best with the 3rd and the 4th. In other words, you can see what is going to happen. That is, both male principles can only integrate and meet each other through 2 yin female principles. And that the female principle can only meet the opposing female principle through the yang principles. I really shouldn't be saying male and female because that's just going to be confusing. Just the yang and the yin in that. But it becomes very different when you drop in the 5th base. Because you can see that the 5th base has a connection to all the 4 other bases. In other words, it has a way of operating that is different and a way of communicating that is different. Remember that the communication that exists between the true yang and the true yin. All of that has to be ultimately negotiated through, gender relationships and interaction and all of this stuff. They always have a formal way in which they connect to each other. But the fifth base in the center doesn't. In other words, it can make U-turns. It can take, for example, the second base at the top left, and it can bring it in another way into contact and form a triangle, if you will, with the yin at the bottom. In other words, it can change the way in which things work, alter them, expand them. It can leave out certain parts in the communication. After all, this is about illusion. Some of the most important illusions we have are the things we don't know and nobody lets us know. We have the illusion that our drinking water is safe. And we really don't want to touch that, do we? Because it's not. However, we go along with that illusion, and we want everybody to have that illusion. Last year in the United States, 600,000 people were ill from tap water. Let's keep our illusions, folks. So one of the things to recognize about the fifth base is that not only does the fifth base participate in creating the illusion, as it were, but it can leave things out of the illusion. It's very good at, in fact, leaving things out. So it can leave out any of the qualities, for example, of any of the corners, in its communication to the others. That's tricky business. The fifth base, that is the way that dimensional field operates, is that, it's really moving things around. It's really playing the game, and it creates either a bridge in which opposing forces can reach each other. After all, the closest way for the yin forces and the yang forces to meet each other is in the illusion in the middle. Please get that. The only way we're going to come together is not through the restrictions of these certain lines and angles that we have, but when we all agree to jump into the middle and accept the illusion. And that instead of this being energy that is moving around on the outside, that this is all triangular energy, in that sense, 4 triangles in the graphic sense, triangular energy in which the information is always moving around and always meeting in a hub. Always meeting in, if you will, the illusion. And you see, that's the job of the fifth base. The job of the fifth base is to pull everybody into that illusion together, not to leave aspects out. It doesn't have natural preferences the way the other 4 bases do. Each of those other 4 bases, first of all, are always going to have a resistance to its opposite. The mother and the eldest daughter, the father and the eldest son, there's always going to be this distance between them. Always. The bridging of that is the next generation. That's the way it always gets bridged. It's the way that it always works. But the fact of the matter is that here, in looking at this diagram, you can also see that that's the way that we communicate to each other. For example, it is not going to be natural for a first base to communicate directly to, the second base that's on the other side. It just isn't. It's most natural that, the eldest son is going to go and talk to the mother, the father in this case. The father is going to go talk to the wife, or it's going to go talk to the daughter. I think there's a problem with Harry. Their natural way of moving is moving along the lines here on the outside. In other words, that's the natural way in which they interact with each other. All the time, the fifth base is trying to pull them into the center and saying, look, it's easy. You can go right across the middle here. You don't have to go around the corner. You don't have to do it that way. You can come straight in here. Now, that's the step. The real thing is to bring everybody in at the same time. The real thing is for everybody to take on the communication provided by and through the fifth base that says, this is the illusion we're all in. Let's all be in this illusion together. Don't go running off into your corner over there and trying to work it out alone, because it isn't going to work. We need everybody to be in here inside of the illusion together. There are very practical things that happen just given this kind of knowledge, is that it isn't necessarily your relationship with your mother or your relationship with your father. But you see, anybody who's going to carry that opposite base to you. In other words, if you're somebody who has either first, second, third, or fourth personality base, not those that have the 5. If you have any of those bases, then you have to recognize that, you're always going to be dealing with these angles, and you're always going to be dealing with those forces. And it means that if there's somebody that comes into your life that happens to be at the other end, you're not going to have a way of connecting to them. And you will need somebody else through whom you can connect to them. That may be your child. It may be your sibling. It can end up being many things, but it can end up being that person with that base that carries that quality, that it's on the other side. And unless there's a way that you can find the illusion together to bridge the gap, unless there's going to be a force at the corner, for example, that's going to be able to move you through so you can meet, then you're always going to have difficulties with that being. You see, base knowledge is at the base of the social reorganization of humanity. It really is. You see, the best team, is a team in which all 5 bases are present. That's the best team. All 5 bases, all perspectives, all integrated together into one illusion, whatever the illusion is that brings them together. But you see, that social mechanism is brilliant, because there's a natural way for everyone to communicate with everybody else and to join together into the illusion in the center. So socially, this is having a lot of impact on us. And it's having a lot of impact on us in ways that, again, we don't have any access to. So, of course, it's not easy for us in that sense. If you have somebody that's close to you in your life and they happen to be at the other end, they're at the opposite corner, there's always going to be something in between you. There's always going to be a space in there somewhere. And that the only way that you can deal with that is that you have to deal with that in terms of your movement. Who is that force that can help you integrate it? Now, obviously, along the track of the outside, there's always a place to go. There's always that base being that is going to be an outlet for you. But there's no harmony until you all come together into the center. At some point, we will all see the social importance of 5th bases. By the way, it doesn't mean that they're going to be great communicators in the sense that they're going to deliver the message or anything else. It's not the way it works. What it does mean is that their presence facilitates a way in which forces can come together and merge. And particularly where it has its deepest impact is amongst those of you that would have, for example, a 5th base as your design. Because that would be the nature of your vehicle. It would be to provide the communication. These will be people that have strong communicative skills. It's their vehicle, after all. In other words, the voice of the vehicle, the apparatus of the vehicle, all of that kind of stuff. They're going to have a vehicle that's going to be able to do that job. But you see, if you're in a situation where you've got 3 people in a room that have to work together, and if you're dealing with the fact that it's a corner, whoever is in the middle gets control. And whoever in the middle gets control and the rest of it is left out, the 2 bases that aren't there. It's something to understand about the way in which things work. It doesn't work until we all fit into that together. There's no other way. See, what I like is that you begin to see if you look at the way in which these relationships work, is that you begin to look at these themes that are here in this graphic. So for example, if you're dealing with evolution, if you're dealing with mind, if you're dealing with the second base, and you're dealing with the second base's relationship to the third base, which is being, you can see that the theme of their relationship is material. So one of the things to recognize is that when second and third bases come together, they're very successful at the material level. In other words, they have a natural relationship on the material plane. That when the second base comes together with the fourth, here you're dealing with the brother and the sister. Here you're dealing with the speed, and in that sense what you're dealing with is the biological or life force movement. This is about, in the end, it's deeply reproductive in that sense. Obviously, for a number of reasons, but it's deeply reproductive. And the funny thing about that is that whenever you come back to the middle and you come back to space, you're always coming back to personality. And it's one of the things to see that, for example, if you have in a room together, if you have the second and third and fifth base, in other words, you have this triangle over here. You know, this is the triangle that produces the personality that thrives on material. In other words, this is the illusion of the personality that says material is everything. You know, the triangle up here is a different illusion. You know, it's the personality literally that's there to process things and move things along as quickly as possible. It's a different kind of force. Where you are, positioning, real positioning, that positioning is coming from this side over here. In other words, what you're looking at there is that you're looking at the first and the fourth together. And you know, when you look at the father and you look at the eldest daughter, out of that is what you get position, primogenitor. You know this term, primogenitor? Primogenitor is a term which means that the eldest child inherits. That the eldest child, for example, becomes the next duke or king or blah, 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 whatever the case may be. And throughout the dominance of Yang propaganda, that primogenitor was only something that was male. And you can see that primogenitor is created between the father and the eldest daughter. I know my eldest daughter is an owner of the corporation that I work for. You know, that's what they get. In other words, that's the true primogenitor, is that position in that sense is passed from the yang, and it's passed from the yang to the eldest daughter. It bypasses the son. Doesn't have any real connection to the son. It doesn't. I mean, that's why you know it's a lie to say that the Father and I are one. I mean, I don't mean to be really profane on a Sunday, and it's Easter Sunday after all. And you know, if I'm telling a lie, they'll kill me right now, eh? You know, I'm not responsible for what I say. You know, it's just the illusion moving through me, that's all. We have all these interrelationships. See? They're punishing me. I live on my cross. So do you. So there is a natural bond between the yang and the yin-yang that's very special. In other words, the torch that the yang brings, which is the torch of life itself, it does not give to its partner. It doesn't give it to its polarity. That is, it doesn't give it to the mother. It does not give it to the son. You see, real power is in the eldest daughter because she is the one that through her form can control yang energy. And she's the one that gets, she gets the torch passed to her. again, let us, it's nice for me to be able to use that as an example because that's the old way that the I Ching looked at that. And it's helpful for us because it gives us metaphors. But of course, please recognize that that isn't necessarily going to be gender specific. We are dealing with bases and, it isn't going to necessarily be the archetype that it's your father that passes it on to you. And it's one of the things to notice. For example, I'm yang yang and I do pass things on. That is, I give people authority to do things and so forth and so on. And of course, in the end, it will be healthiest for me to give it to the yin yang and it will be the most natural for me. I'll give it to the yin yin. But the most natural for me is to give it to the yin-yang because that's the way that it works in correspondence to where I am as a base in that structure. And of course, that can be my daughter in that sense. But in fact, it could be just anybody that I'm giving that to, that in fact I'm meeting them at that base level. And because I'm meeting them at that base level, that's how that works. Because it's efficient for it to work that way. They're the natural people to carry the torch. After all, at the base level, the base doesn't care about the other layers. It doesn't, eh? It's not like it matters. For the base, it's how bases deal with bases, like how lines deal with lines, how gates deal with gates. It's the base dealing with bases, and in that context here, you have to see that there's very, very special relationships. When you look at the relationship between the father and the mother, what you get is arguments. It's force. It's all about force. It is the pure yang and the pure yin, and it's beautiful, but it's hell. And c'est magnifique, mais c'est pas la guerre. This is love. So out of that, there's a tremendous amount of energy. There's a tremendous amount of power. Power is a better word. But of course, there is always this, the duality of any form, that is the duality of that power, is that there can be a great deal of conflict in that sense. What makes it work is when the two become one is personality. You see, when the yin and the yang become an illusion together, we're lovers, we're man and wife, we're dog and mate, whatever it happens to be. The moment that we have this illusion, we have a way of getting away from the pure confrontation and power line, and we have a way of diffusing that power line through the illusion. That's very important. It's a technique in negotiating. All negotiators are going to try to create a third point to take the forces away from being absolutely in each other's nose, but so their noses can be slightly turned away so that perhaps they can communicate through the other. I'm not talking to your father. Tell him to pass the salt. Why don't you tell him yourself? It's silly. Blah, blah, blah. You know that one? The way in which we deal with, you see, there's such a deep organization that we don't know anything about. I've been messing around and banging my head with the yin-yin forever. It's where I got my power. I got my power from the yin-yin. It's the mother that gave me all this stuff. I've been giving territory away to all kinds of people who are in fact my eldest daughter. Base speaking. Without ever knowing that. Without ever knowing why I suddenly trust somebody, whatever the hell that means. I'm ready to do this or that, or it's the way it works. It's already there. You see, the real difficulty in being stupid is that you miss all the nice things that are going on that are really interesting to watch. If we ever got to a point where we knew everybody's base, it's great, eh? You can see the advantage of that kind of knowledge. You know where your natural allies are. You just know. And you know something else as well. You know what you're here for in relationship with the other. You know if you've got a material direction. You know if you're just supposed to be busy. The evolution design relationship through speed. There's all these things. You know that you're here to be, the one that fixes how things operate, that position that you can gain, the authority that can come out of that. We have all these different little relationships. And the only way that it all works, again, comes back to accepting that there's a place we must all meet. That we all must have the same illusion. That's the most important thing. You know, if we all agree to share the same illusion, everything's okay. I mean, how do you think these nuts get people to kill themselves because there's a goddamn spaceship coming? I mean, you know, these are intelligent people. They were not fools. These are not people who are suddenly just going to accept that. You know, that illusion had to be created. It was communicated. That illusion was established, and they all agreed to share the illusion. And when you agreed to share an illusion, you're there. The spaceship is coming. Death will not be painful. We're going to have a good ride. And off you go. It's easy. It's easy. I know I have the power to create those spells. It's easy. Human beings. You see, until we understand how the game works, anybody can fool you. Take you into the illusion, but take you into an illusion that you accept without recognizing its validity. And remember, in the Maya, you only have one protection. You only have one suit of armor. That's your type. You don't have anything else. And out of that, you get the right connections where you do the right things. You know. Otherwise, all of this gets real heavy, eh? Because it's very confusing. Because remember, we're down at the base. We're at the base. We don't even have access. We haven't even got to tone. We don't have access. You know, when you get right up to the surface of somebody's design, you know, and there they are, and they're supposed to be social and blah, 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 and all of these things, and they're designed to integrate with others and make friends and do all of these things, and they get born in a household in which their parents have bases that are at the other end. Both parents. You know, or whatever. You know, the frustration of all of that. No matter how much they try to be social, no matter how much they try, they cannot get across that barrier. See, the only thing that helps you in that, because there's no way of you healing yourself through awareness of that, it's only your type. Can't change your base. It's 15 billion years old. You know? I'll go fuck around with that. Nothing's going to happen to that. But you can live in the Maya. And you can live in this illusion. You can accept this illusion. You can accept what it is to be in these vehicles. And accept it not just at the mundane level of what this is to live in the world, to feed oneself and all of that stuff. But to accept that this is the only way in which we can play out our role. It's the only way that we've been offered. It's the only game in town. It's the only thing. And you know, we've got to get past that point where we're always in pain. And we got to get past that point where nothing works for us. When we enter into the next cycle in 2027, cycles carry fears. And the next cycle is bringing us deep, deep, deep fears, visceral fears about our very survival. That's all an illusion. But we better be prepared. You know, you can only be prepared by accepting what all of this is. By accepting yourself, by following it out, because otherwise the game's rigged. You don't have a chance. You don't have a chance. You know, you never mind bases, which are hard for any of us to verify. But just color. You'll see. Whoa. You know, if you think that you have any kind of control over anything, wait till you see the motivations that are driving all these little aspects in you. You know, they're all there. And then you suddenly find out, you know, why you're afraid, you know, with this or that, or why you do this or that, or blah, blah, blah. Oh, helpless in that. See, by the moment that you get to that and you see that, that's what it's all about. This is the greatest communicating that we can do. It's reassuring ourselves of the perfection and the beauty of our Maya. Isn't it nice? Yes, we have a nice Maya today. Oh, isn't it a beautiful day, they say. Yes, indeed. Yeah. I have never, ever really cared about anything other than being alive. I don't really care if there is whatever. And I don't really care about the future. And it isn't important to me personally what happens or what doesn't happen. See, I love being here. Each moment. It's the most incredible thing of all. And it's not because I convince myself that I'm serving the totality. You know, what a lot of illusionary crap. After all, yes, it is going on. But, you know, if you don't know what that is or how it works or you can't experience it or any of that, it doesn't matter. It's my life that matters. It's my life that matters. In the end, by making my life the thing that matters, everything else benefits from that. It's my life that matters, and this life is in this Maya. And I've been lucky. You know, I got a key. I got to really be able to see something that was real for me in this Maya, a tool that I could use, a way for me to get out of the pain of the Maya. And I was in a lot of pain in the Maya. And it worked. I mean, it really worked. And it works for others. And it's what it's all about. You know, now it's not a question for me of knowing, you know. If I was not a messenger from such physical forces, I never would have had the stamina to be able to have provided so much information and teaching in such a short time. But you know, I'm a slave to those forces. I'm obedient to them. I don't have any damn choice. But those things for me, at the personal level, they're not important. They're interesting. They're interesting, that's all. They're fun to think about, that's all. It's my life that matters. And my life is better since I stopped thinking that I ran it. It's a lot better. You know, I've been able to find a great deal of love in my life since then. I've been able to go beyond what I thought my limitation was as a human being. All of that's been made possible by me doing nothing. That my big fat ego stays out of it. You know, that I don't get involved in all of that. And what's come out of that is a real joy of life. As long as I can die this way, it's all okay for me. I don't need anything more than that. I know that it's all a joke, and it's very funny, and I love it because it's a very beautiful joke. Eh? It's as beautiful a joke as you can find because that's the theater of our existence. But for us, because we have to live in this plane, and it does feel very dense, you know, the only way we can do that is by embracing it, by loving it, and you can't do that unless you yourself have finally let go. You know, that you finally just live it out. The tragedy is that you don't have a choice. You see, that's the eternal truth. If you had a choice, you'd choose to be enlightened, or you'd choose to be this, or you'd choose to be that. And of course, it's all a joke. You know, you have to wait for it. If you wait for it, you get it. I mean, you really do. You know, and it's the same thing with coming to grips with your design and living in the world. You know, if you allow it to work, you will see that it will work for you. It will come to you. When I was given this knowledge, I had a very funny reaction. I said, Jesus, this is a lot of stuff. You know? I was like, shit, this is a lot of stuff. You know? And that's us. It is very complex. It is. And the way in which we are designed puts us in an environment that we're so deeply sensitive to. Deeply sensitive to. The sounds, the tastes, the aromas, the warmth of bodies, All of this stuff. But what's the point of suffering? I don't get it. I still don't get it. When it's so easy not to. Remember, that's the whole point. You bring somebody to their type, you start them on their way, we'll finally get to a point where we can get rid of that nonsense. Nothing else will work. Nothing. Because the Maya is the densest thing. And when you look at this graph, recognize that what we have had throughout our evolution is that we've had bits and pieces of these connections operating independently, struggling against the other. All of this, trying to find a way in which all of this Maya really can work so that we can really get on with our job. Every holy book ends with a promise. It ends with the promise that everybody gets the reward of the light that's deserving. You can scratch the deserving. There is a point for us in our evolution as human beings where it's possible for a majority of us to be able to live our nature. And that will create a very different vibration in the world. It just will. But it's only when we surrender, to this Maya that we're ever going to have any peace. And that's what it's about. It's about being at peace. Pluto sits there in the fifth gate. It reminds us that inner peace is always available to us. That inner peace is something that is possible. And today we sit with the cross of the unexpected. You never know. You never know. But the beauty of it is that the moment that you truly surrender to the Maya, that's the moment that the Maya leaves you alone. It leaves you alone. You're part of the team. And you see, that's what we all are. All of these bases that we carry as facets within our crystals. Remember, it's us that makes the dimensions operate. It is us that is actually a part of all of these dimensional fields, bringing them all together. It's us, after all, that's doing all of that, we funny creatures. The moment we enter into one illusion together, there are many Mayas at work in this world. The Maya in the jungle of Borneo is different from the Maya of the subway station in Manhattan. When we have one Maya, when we have one illusion that we can all share together, we can actually make a spaceship show up. We can just create it out of nothing.